Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is an Opta Live webinar, the 7th in our series. I want to thank FAIRTIQ, a new Opta member, for sponsoring this webinar today. We've had a lot of interest in this topic, and so I'd like to turn it over to Antoine Balieff and Helena Kefner.
Thank you, Karen. I'm getting distracted by all the pop-ups, and it's a pleasure to be here. And it's a wonderful series that you have started. My name is Antoine Balieff. I'm lead North America for FAIRTIQ. I'm based in Toronto, and before FAIRTIQ, I was at Metrolinx for 10 years, where I occupied a number of roles in innovation, regional planning, fair and service integration, and then I had the opportunity to join FAIRTIQ in the fall. I'm myself originally from Switzerland, so it was a neat thing to work for a Swiss company, and I think you'll understand why it's a really fantastic product that I had the opportunity to try when I was visiting friends and family back home. So I'll start the presentation, but before that, I'd like to invite my colleague Elena to introduce herself as well.
Yeah, warm welcome also from Europe. I'm Helena Köfler. I'm part of the German business development team. I also joined recently in spring, and it's very exciting times to join such a dynamic startup because there is so much going on in Europe and lots of interesting topics that we cover. So today I want to include a little bit the European perspective so we can really combine the North American and the European perspective.
Thanks, Elena. So without further ado, a bit of housekeeping. You'll be able to ask your questions via chat or even live at the end. We always like some great questions. The meeting, as you know, it should be obvious by now, is recorded. And then Karen assures me that we'll share the presentation and recording so that you can play it and replay it and share it with your friends and watch it as a family. So about FAIRTIQ, so we'll get to the employer programs later, but we wanted to explain a little bit who we are and how what we do and how it works. So a few years ago, our founder, Jean-Mathieu Choucan, was the head of ticketing for the Swiss Railways and was facing the prospect of spending hundreds of millions of francs, euros, dollars. It's all pretty much the same in this anecdote. And it was facing the prospect of spending that money on a fare collection system for the whole of Switzerland. He thought he had a better idea, better concept, and founded FAIRTIQ. And so we've been in operations for 5 years, and the solution can be used throughout Switzerland. So you can use FAIRTIQ to go from anywhere to anywhere in Switzerland on transit, be it a cable car, funicular, cogwheel, vehicle, boat, streetcar, bus, or even natural train. And we've expanded into German cities, Austrian cities, and launching large-scale pilots in Belgium, France, and the UK. So we're very proud to have just crossed the threshold of 30 million trips just Saturday. And so we're also benefiting from the growth in or the rebirth of ridership in Europe post-pandemic, and we're just touching wood that it continues. So why do we think that we are so special? The one-button experience. So this is a quick demo of how the solution works. So you can see Bern, which is the location, which is detected on the phone. The user just checks in, can show the ticket to a device or an inspector or a driver, and then at the end of the trip, just needs to check out and get a summary of their trip. So you have the same thing here, but I would like to point out the fourth screen, which has the Smart Stop feature. So it could be a bit annoying for a user to have to check in and check out if they're in an agency that really doesn't have any distance-based fares. So what we've done, listening to customer input, is that we've introduced the Smart Stop feature, which ends the trip for the user when the system detects that the trip is completed. So you have the benefit of a tap on, tap off, or a fare by distance type system without the hassle of having to tap off. And for those of you who have experienced these systems, if you forget to tap off, then you usually get a penalty. And you will see why it's so important to have that origin destination, because it creates the platform for very, I would say, very flexible pricing. So this is an example here briefly. The user checked in, I'm going to use my pointer here, checked in here, walked to the stop, boarded the bus, rode the bus 3 stops, and then didn't do anything at the end of their trip, and then walked to the final destination. But the system detected that the first segments were the first and last segment were walking, and only the middle segment was bus. And so this is all without any equipment or validators on the bus. The user just uses their phone, and the agency doesn't have to install anything. So that's the first, I would say, the first foundation of the solution. The second is pricing. And we accommodate pricing for about 600 operators. And so you can imagine the diversity of needs that they have. And so we talk about the foundational layer for pricing. This is usually what might go to a board or a government for approval. First, is it a flat fare, a zone-based fare, distance-based fares? What concessions do you have? And transfer rules. So, for example, is it 60 minutes, 90 minutes, unidirectional, or is there conversely no transfer benefit? Then you can add time of day. So, for example, peak and off-peak pricing or weekend pricing. And what is going to become relevant to the rest of the discussion is geofencing. So the ability to set fares by the route, the area, but down to the stop or the station. And this is really an overlay on top of the existing fare structure, and can be done for a specific client or a specific site. And then the third one is the promotional layer that rewards volume. So the way we've done it in the past was through monthly passes. So if you commit to spending a certain amount of money, we'll give you an all-you-can-eat pass for the rest of the month. But with more and more people having flexible lifestyles and maybe working from home, not knowing how much they will travel over the course of the month, other modes of other ways to reward volume have emerged, like capping, but also incentives that can be based on the number of trips or a spend. So maybe you ride 5 times and you get 5% off, which is very common in Switzerland, 5 times in a month, and you get 5% on what you spend. So this is really to incentivize infrequent users, and then they get the credit on their account for a month, and then it disappears a little bit like Starbucks stars. And then the last one is group targeting. So the ability to create blocks of voucher codes to create a special fare policy for each code, based on what I discussed before, time of day or location. And you'll see how this all comes together. So transit benefits, and forgive us the whimsy of grumpy cats, but Elena and I really like cats. And so, you know, we're Central Europeans, so we don't joke a lot, but we allowed ourselves this little bit of whimsy. So grumpy cat does not like transit benefits and the way they're administered right now, because often it means buying passes for everyone or buying blocks of passes, not knowing how much will be used, and having to prepay. That is not related to the actual usage that will be made. You don't know if the person will use it to commute every day, or if they'll just use it to it'll sit in a drawer, or they'll resell it, or have the pass used by their family. Often it means sending physical media. And then in the case of businesses, I think we've all been in companies where there's a couple passes that say do not remove in a Sharpie, and you can borrow the pass to go to appointments, but of course that pass is never back where it belongs, or the person who owns the key to the drawer is on vacation, et cetera, et cetera. You can't really separate personal or business trips, and you can't include customers or visitors. These are really closed systems, and there's no link to behavior change. And finally, there's not a lot of data about how much of it is used. So making the business case internally as an employer or a buyer of these bulk passes can be a bit challenging. So that creates a lot of entry barriers, and that's why only some jurisdictions that have made these programs mandatory have had a lot of buy-in, but otherwise it's a bit hit and miss without a lot of marketing for these types of programs. So we enthusiastically entered the market for transit benefits based on the advantages that our technology provides. So we really allow programs to be designed around who, so who is benefiting, where, so where it applies geographically, not just zones and at the scale of the city, but really, as I said, the pinpointed station or stop, and when, and then who pays what. So what share is paid for by the beneficiary, so the end user, and what share is paid for by the sponsor or employer. So let's go through some applications, some of which will be very familiar to you and some of which are maybe a bit new. So employers can buy monthly credits. So for example, they can say up to $50 per employee, free travel between sites, and a discount based on these criteria, which can be 100% or just 20%, 50% based on the behavior. So of course, the benefits for the employer, which is traditional TDM, is reduced parking demand and employee satisfaction. But the new benefits for the employer is really targeting trips that really matter. I really want to subsidize only the trips to my office during office hours, and I want to make sure that I only pay for what users actually use. So if you have a lot of vacations or if there's a lot of telework, then employers will pay less. In the case of venues, so think of a mall, a stadium, but it could be a library or a community center. The system allows to provide discounted or free trips to these venues, specific stops, specific times, for example, a game, a concert, and make it available to anyone that travels to these areas, or somebody who has a code. So of course, the benefits are similar to employers, so less parking, congestion, but also in this case, it's tied to a commercial objective. So a mall has a fixed number of parking spaces, and they've been trying to encourage transit, but just messaging that transit is a great alternative to driving to the mall is not quite good enough. And so by ensuring that more people take transit, they can have more visitors, more sales. And really, it's about reimbursing transit, just like businesses have reimbursed parking in the past, just stamping the ticket that the user gets. And again, same as with employers, they only pay for what is actually used. And then the third category is sponsors, which is a broad category that really describes anyone who wants to subsidize transit for a commercial or policy reason. So that could be a discount or credit for new buyers or tenants in the case of real estate, maybe in collaboration with the municipality working on parking reduction agreements. What's really interesting, I was in a conversation with a transit agency in Canada, and they said we could even tie it to a new service. So we've had a hard time getting workers in the business park to take transit. And there's always the temptation to add service, but then not being sure if it's going to be used. And here you can target the service to the users and at the same time target a discount to encourage use on that specific line. So the benefits is that you shape habits at moving time. That's traditional TDM theory, that a new tenant, a new buyer will be more inclined to change habits at the time of move, grow ridership on new services, and meet your policy objectives really in a more targeted way. And again, same thing, only pay for what is actually used. So I was Mr. Theory, and we're bringing Elena here to bring some European experience, and hopefully in not too long, we'll have some US and Canadian examples as well. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Antoine. So to really make this topic a little bit more tangible, I really want to show you some case studies that were mostly done in Switzerland, but also we have some German and Austrian examples. The first example is from Hilti. It's an international company and they have 3 different company sites in Liechtenstein, but also Switzerland. And previously they were using a daily pass to commute between the different company sites. But it turned out not to be flexible enough and not really meet the demands of the company. So what FAIRTIQ offered instead were non-personalized promotional codes. And FAIRTIQ is also able to automatically detect the intersite travel. So it makes it really easy for employees to really commute between the different company sites. And in addition to that, the employees benefit also from public transport credit worth 50 Swiss francs, and that is part of the company's benefits program.
Right, and it's only paid when it's used.
Another example, this is a bank, and they are actually using these anonymous subscriptions that Antoine was explaining and referring to before. So you can imagine not very flexible, not very user-friendly when someone is on vacation. They are not available. So yeah, really, really hard to manage. So also FAIRTIQ solution was also like a promotional code to also detect the journeys between the different company sites, because they are also having 2 company sites, and FAIRTIQ is again able to really detect the 2 locations and to really enable this kind of traveling. What is also interesting here, that FAIRTIQ is able to really include this restriction that only trips are covered that are done Monday to Friday or between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. So really differentiate between your private or a professional trip. So this is also possible with FAIRTIQ.
Great. It might be that one of the locations in the popular downtown area and you don't want people to do their Saturday shopping at the bank's expense.
Yeah, it's also, you can also like encourage off-peak travel when you want your employees to show up really early at work. This is also a perfect opportunity. The next example actually comes more from an academic context. We have a very successful cooperation between a university and academic institution, the BOKO University, that is located in Vienna in Austria. And just a couple of years ago, they opened a new campus that is outside of Vienna. So actually the university wanted to offer discounted travel for students. And with FAIRTIQ, students actually benefit from a really significant account, whether it's for a one-way ticket or for a one-day pass. And I think overall students are a very promising target group for this kind of traveling, because they're of course very often using their smartphone. So it's a very promising target group. And how does it work? The students, they can download a discount code from their academic university account. Afterwards, they go to the transit agency website and they can sign up as a test user of the lab. So we can actually make sure that only students can actually benefit from this discount.
Right, and in the North American context, and especially Canadian, this would be a good way to transition from UPass to a more pay-as-you-go form, or if a UPass has failed several referenda, to come up with something that benefits students without the issue of the UPass.
Another example that is more from a collaboration between a municipality. Here we have the city of Halle. It's a city in Germany, and they have a famous Christmas market. And here we launched a personalized promo campaign. So actually FAIRTIQ is able to detect the surrounding bus stations and public transport stations close to the Christmas market. So whoever traveled by public transport to the Christmas market could benefit from a free ride. So it's also possible to really just make it enable it during a certain day, when you like on weekends or after certain hours. So this is all of this is possible. And we have another collaboration with a shopping mall. So when they opened the shopping mall, we also launched a promo campaign that everyone traveling by public transport to this shopping mall would also get a free ride and a discounted ride.
Ironically, I had seen this slide many times, but it's the first time I see it so big. And so I can actually read that there was also a draw for prizes at the same time. So trying to build excitement around transit, using the app, and then giving something free to riders who do what the sponsor, in this case, the city, wants them to do.
And I think it's also a perfect opportunity to really incentivize travel by public transport. I'm sure in North America, the context is very similar to Europe, that lots of transit agencies, they struggle to really win clients back and customers back after the lockdown. So what the city of Würzburg, it's a small city also in Germany, what they did, they offered a €5 voucher for use on transit. And it was one objective was to support the local retail, to really encourage people to go to the local shops, but also to really say thank you to the loyal transit users that during the lockdown and the pandemic were also still using public transport. And the promo codes were valid for 4 years, so for weeks, not years. And if they were not used within this time, they would just expire. So yeah, that was very, very easy. And they were in very high demand. So after 8 hours, after the users got the email with the information about the campaign, they were already depleted. So that really shows that these campaigns, they can be like, it's not much effort to really write an email, and you can really win back clients, especially during this post-pandemic times. Then we have another partnership with quite an unusual customer. You might also wonder, wow, Mercedes-Benz, how is that gonna work? But I think they just figured that there are more, or that mobility consists of more than just one means of transport, and they want to also position themselves as a mobility provider. So everyone who bought an electric car, they got a public transport credit. So every month they would get 40 Swiss francs that they could use for public transport. And it would also expire if the customer wouldn't use it.
Right, and I think when I make this presentation, people get a bit stuck on Mercedes and the application to their context. But it could be anyone. It's just the principle that we provided voucher codes to Mercedes, and they provided this benefit, 40 Swiss francs, or about 40 US or 50 Canadian for per month for a year. But it could be one time, and it could be a green-minded organization, or it could be a library, or and really anyone. So let's talk a little bit about how it works. So the fun part, the tour of Central Europe is over, and now let's talk about reality. So I don't want to go into a lot of details. You will get this slide, but basically the way it works is that first, what's important is that the employer really designs. So it's like a tailored program. So who, what, when do you want this discount to apply? So that's defined by the employer. Then codes are provided by us to employers that distributes them through their channel of choice to their employees. Then employees set up the app. That's a one-time thing, create the account, enter their code, and then they just have to use the app. Account management, very easy. We can very easily remove or add employees as they come and go. and at the end of the day, the employer receive a report and receives an invoice for exactly what was consumed with again data about what how that money was spent. It's just a tiny bit different for venues, because in that case we can we don't necessarily have to create codes. It might be that the venue just wants to offer free transit to anyone who comes to their area. Maybe they're in a business park, or doesn't stop by a stadium that really only belongs to that facility. So in that case, codes don't have to be generated. Otherwise, it's very similar to the experience with employers. In terms of the money flow, which I was personally curious about, what really matters to understand is that the transit agency at the bottom left is made whole, and they receive full fares. We couple together the contribution from the company. So for example, they offered a $100 travel credit and 50% of fares, and the employee first would draw down their travel credit and then pay 50%. So the employee pays what they have to pay, the company is billed, and then we assemble everything and then we remit the whole amount to the transit agency. So that's really a new source of revenue for transit agencies that they may not have had before. So now we're lifting the lid on our kitchen, and with some things that are actually already in beta, and so I've been trying it myself, and so Elena will let you know a little bit what's cooking.
Yes, we are very excited to launch the various payment profiles very soon. Here on the slide, you see in the middle, you can see a mock-up. On the top, you have your personal profile with your personal credit card. And then you can add also a work profile, and you can either add your private credit card or the company's credit card. And FAIRTIQ will make sure that you get the invoice for the right trip. So instead of this one button experience, it's actually a 2-button experience, because before you start your trip, you just have to choose whether it's a private or a professional trip. So that's what you can see on the screen to your right. So the basic solution, the standard solution, which is also perfectly suitable for smaller companies, that you actually use these multiple payment profiles that I was referring to on the previous slide. They can select it before the trip begins. And FAIRTIQ then makes sure to send separate receipts for each payment profile. So you don't have to worry afterwards, was it a professional trip or a private trip, because FAIRTIQ makes sure that you get the invoice and the receipts for the correct trip. And in this case, the employees can set the relevant invoices to their companies if it was a professional trip, and then they can hand it in as an expense report. And we expect to launch this in autumn this year. This is the Pro solution is similar to the standard solution, except for a few modifications. So first of all, the company's banking information is not visible to employees. For instance, if you're a larger company, you might not want to share your company credit cards detail with 100 employees. So in this case, it's not visible. And the invoice is directly sent to the company, so no need for you to hand it in. And you will also get the trip details in combination with the payment notice. And then when we launch this, we always define a contact person or a travel manager that manages the authorizations and eligibility of the employees. So in case you have a new colleague joining you, the travel manager can just simply add this new person to the system. And we also expect to launch this at the beginning of next year.
So I want to talk a little bit about reporting. There's really two types of reports, and I'll focus on reports that that are germane to this conversation, which is reports by sponsors and employers. There's a whole other side of reporting for transit agencies that would have a lot more information about origin destinations that they can really use to optimize their services and understand the impact of service changes, for example. Here we're talking mostly about financials and usage. And so you can see on the left-hand side is more focused on spend. And you can see, unfortunately, this is real. This is April, May, and June of 2020. I think that's an actual client. I'm sure that it has been the case pretty much everywhere. And then on the right-hand side, you have the total number of registered and active users. So this is really an example of what one of the reports that the partner would receive. Of course, more detailed financials that would allow them to audit the invoice that they receive. So how do we make it happen? So first, we have really calibrated the whole company to be very easy to work with, because we know that transit agencies have traditionally done really large tenders and that take a very long time. So we made it really easy to test. And because we're hardware free, it's very easy to set up and then take away. So first we can set up a demo. We already have the data in Toronto and Boston that allow you to really use the app and see how the trip is mapped. So without the pricing and payment, of course. Then we can use that to set up a pilot, very focused on something. It can be very small. That doesn't really matter to us. We're very happy to work on something really limited. And then we can use the opportunity to try a new fare product, or as we covered today, a new partnership with employers or large venues or other sponsors. And then we're very open to working with universities and consultants to really design a study with a beginning and an end, and cohorts and testing standards. We found that relationship really productive. So you might ask yourself, well, so what is the role of the employer? Can an employer or a large company approach you directly? And what happens? Are you cutting the transit agency out? Not at all. We welcome conversations with employers who want to explore this potential with us. And but then, of course, with a concept, then the idea is that we could go together to the transit agency and say, hey, we know that you have a solution in place already for fare collection. You may already have an app, but this is something that we want to try because we feel that it has features that are a little bit unique. So we get that question a lot. So the Grumpy, I couldn't find a happy cat, so that's my next version, but it's Cat Bus. If you haven't watched the movie My Neighbor Totoro, it's really wonderful. So the happy thoughts, leaving you with happy thoughts. What the application allows to do is set specific policies focused on relevant trips. So instead of buying passes for everyone, only paying for actual trips that are taken, separate personal and business clearly to, and really that's a feature that you have in the Uber app and in expense reporting. That's very much expected nowadays. And really the idea of matching the offer that exists around reimbursing for parking and stamping that ticket, and doing the same for transit, making it really easy for destinations to support transit. And then at the end, get fantastic data about what is consumed and understand why, and being able to support the business case. So that's it. And I see that Karen showed up to signal the end of the presentation and start the question period.
Yes, and we do have questions, and thank you to all of the global participants here today. We not only have Ontario Transit Systems, we have folks from across the globe, and Nathaniel is in Singapore. It was midnight when Nathaniel joined us, and he has a number of questions. And for everyone else, you can either put them in the chat, you can use the raise hand feature under the reactions, and you can simply unmute and jump in at a point. But I will start with Nathaniel's question for Helena. Just backing up here, a question about the expired promo codes, and does FAIRTIQ or the client reach out to customers who were not able to use the promo codes?
This is also something that we can customize very easily. So for instance, sometimes we also work with push notifications. For instance, we have a partner in Austria, and then customers, they get a push notification. For instance, if they travel, if the monthly subscription would have been cheaper than the amount that they actually spend during this month. So I think push notification, that is something that you can do very easily. And apologize for the background noise. My neighbor just started to use his drilling machine. So these are the pleasures of the home office.
Exactly. Antoine, we'll go over to some of the questions that Nathaniel has for you. Nathaniel, did you want to unmute and ask your questions? Oh, well, maybe I will jump in quickly then. Going back to the slide, the money flow example, asking, it seems like FAIRTIQ's business model needs to include employers for transit benefits in order to benefit transit through the full fare payments. Are there markets where the population of such employers are smaller than is necessary to cover the cost after paying transit agencies the full fare?
No, I would say it's rather not the opposite, but the base business of FAIRTIQ is not working with employers. I would say it's something that's been added. And I would say that there's a number of markets where we don't have employers, so we don't need employers. The compensation for FAIRTIQ typically comes from transit agencies, as they would for other channels. So a fare card system, etc. They would buy capital and operations for the cost of fare collection, and we're not different. So I would say no, we don't absolutely need employers to make it work.
Okay, and I see we do have Nathaniel there. And Nathaniel, I understand you're already piloting and testing out FAIRTIQ. Would you like to ask a couple of your other questions?
Yeah, so I have one question in the chat box, which is regarding user management. So there was a slide that mentioned about the employer needing to contact someone from FAIRTIQ in order to like add or remove employees. So I was wondering if this responsibility could be just delegated to the employer itself. So there's no need for an external contact at FAIRTIQ for that.
It is the employer contacting FAIRTIQ, the transit agency, unless they want to take care of it. They're not involved. We're asked very often, why don't we have a portal? It hasn't been a priority for us before, and we have found with our partners that they were just as happy to, instead of finding the login, logging on to the portal, finding the way to add or remove an employee, it was just as easy for them to send a quick email and say add, remove, send, and then we're pretty efficient at processing it too.
So Karen, may I just add one more question? So it's regarding my active testing phase now. So Antoine, I'm sure you know Julian. So we managed to do some testing, and I have one problem here in Singapore is that because we do not have GTFS data, so I'm not sure about North American cities. Maybe there are some where the GTFS data is outdated, and you have the bus stop names and locations are inaccurate. So how do you resolve this if you do not have a GTFS data stream or data feed that is ready for FAIRTIQ to use?
It's a good question. When I worked at Metrolinx, everybody wanted a regional trip planner. And so we said, let's do a regional trip planner. And then we realized that in some cases, the underlying data didn't really exist. And then transit agencies were also facing the prospect of having to install devices inside buses for next stop announcements. And again, that was relying on good data. So it is a prerequisite to have that good data, because we do need to build a mental map of the transit system with accurate routes and stops. So we can provide some help to the transit agency. But nowadays we find that in North America, it's pretty common for agencies to have accurate GTFS data, and it doesn't need to be GTFS RT or real time. It can be just a static GTFS.
Yeah, the problem is that our GTFS data is, I think, 1,190 days plus old. So I'm not sure if there might be similar issues in North America.
No, it's usually not that much of an issue.
Nathaniel, thank you for being up so late and joining us at such an hour. Again, any other questions, you can either post them in the chat, use the raise hand feature, or simply unmute. We have about 10 more minutes. We know folks have a 1 o'clock, and we want to honor the timelines for getting people on to the rest of their afternoon. We've got time for another couple questions. Antoine, I know that a number of Opta members have taken up the opportunity to chat with you about some of the current situations. I'm thinking about things like U-passes and changes in policy in Ontario around U-passes. Maybe you can share some aggregated comments about how FAIRTIQ's solution might assist with a non-universal U-pass in Ontario now.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who are not familiar with it, then you can correct me, Karen, but and I think it's a solution that's actually quite common in Canada, and I think perhaps less so in the US, where usually a student society or student union on a campus initiates a referendum for student fees to include a mandatory component for transit. The amount is brokered with the transit agency, and some transit agencies have a lot of capacity, so they're able to provide a very good deal. Some transit agencies would need to add a lot of service, so that they need to reflect that cost. It's been at the same time really popular and really controversial, and there's been policy changes in Ontario to make these optional. So of course, transit agencies lose out when you don't have this guaranteed pool of revenue coming in from the entire student body. But what we can do, and I think that it's really similar to what Elena talked about with Boku, is the opportunity to provide discounted fares, or we can also use FAIRTIQ to provide a voucher, and the voucher is provided by the university and flowed to the students' app, and so they can ride unlimited. The condition, and so the little the contribution by the student is that they have to check in and check out. But the benefit of that is that now, for the really first time ever, both the university and the transit agency has a really good usage data of how it's actually been used. So in terms of the money flow, we can, as I said, it can be a pay-as-you-go and a discount like Boku, or it can be more like a pass, a discounted pass that we would push as a voucher. And so basically it would be 100% voucher, and the student doesn't pay for anything. The advantage is that it's attached to a smartphone, so you can't, and we know how people are used to or attached to their phones. They're not going to put their account on Kijiji once it's attached to their phone. And somebody could say, well, but somebody could sell the voucher code. There's also a way for an institution to collect phone numbers in aggregate, remit them to us, and then we can reflect these phone numbers on our system. So that adds an even greater layer of security.
Interesting. We have a great follow-up question to this. Sorry, here. Where's Ken there? He's observing that the solution appears to be very customer-centric, and he's wondering if there's any opposition to transit agencies not getting the guaranteed fares up front, which they typically would with a UPass program, with that extra service that's needed. By knowing what that revenue stream is up front, transit systems can invest in the services that the university students need. Ken is saying that here in Ontario, there are a few agencies that rely heavily on passes as that guaranteed revenue. Is there a soft or a middle ground?
I think so we're not, we don't really want to be party to a policy conversation. We just want to provide solutions that work for everyone. I think it's basic economics that if a transit agency was able to offer a really great deal on the condition that the entire student body would participate, they may have, and hopefully they're able to adjust the cost of their product for pay-as-you-go. That would be maybe closer to the transit pass that everybody would get. But this is part of a general conversation that exists, and I'd like to hear from Elena as well about the transition from passes to postpaid or capping, because a lot of agencies, and I remember being in these transit agency meetings that we had Metrolinx, and I had one GM to my left who said, we need to get rid of passes, they're the past, they're ridiculous, we need to move to capping. And then the general manager to the right would say, over my dead body, I need passes, I need the cash flow, it's the backbone of my business. So Elena, what's the discussion around passes and caps and more postpaid in Europe?
It's actually a very similar discussion. So also like German, Austrian transit agency, they really depend a lot on these passes because they really have a long-term guarantee. But on the other hand, the goal of FAIRTIQ is really to keep people in the public transport system. So what we noticed during this Corona and COVID times, that lots of people, there was a modal shift, people switching from public transport to their own private car. So I think now we really need to find flexible and user-centric solutions to really make public transport attractive and accessible. So I think our goal is rather to keep these people in the system. So, and we really appreciate also customers only using public transport twice a week instead of daily, because they don't have to commute to work on a daily basis, but that they still are using public transport and not using the car. So I think this is really our mission, to really make public transport attractive and accessible. Or also if you just if it's raining and you just have your shopping bags and you just do like 2 bus stops with the bus. So then I think when you just have to swipe and with this one button experience, it's also likely that you use the bus. But if you have to use a ticket and vending machine, it's very challenging. So yeah, I think user centricity, I think this is also really key also for making public transport attractive.
We hope that always wins out. A couple things: that we have a partnership in Switzerland with the equivalent of ARP in the US or CARP in Canada. They organize mini courses where seniors gather, install the app, and then they write transit together. And we have a very large number of seniors because they were completely intimidated by vending machines or having to face a grumpy driver, although that never happens if there are agencies listening, about, or just the stress, the anticipation of having to have the right change, just sliding one button. The other thing is that Switzerland has a price watcher, he's called informally Mr. Price, and he recently wrote a report calling out transit agencies and with a number of graphs that showed how passes are believed to be better value by users than they actually are. And they said, you know, with the advent of telework, and if telework continues to be the rule of the day, monthly passes and the way they're priced will be worse and worse value for users. And his recommendation was for transit agencies to really come up with pricing innovation to better meet the needs of riders, and so there's a lot of fare innovation that's happening in Switzerland and Germany to replace these passes.
Interesting. Thank you, Ken and Nathaniel, for your questions. Last call then. Would anyone like to post a question, unmute, raise a hand? We have a couple of minutes here to take advantage of asking some questions about all these case studies that Helena and Antoine have been able to share today. While we're just giving people another moment, the presentation from today will be available. The recording from today will be available. We'll post it both to the Opta website as well as send an email with the links to all participants. So we invite you to use that resource with others of your team who may not have been available to join us today. Last call for questions.
So I'd like to say, usually you ask for questions and you get somebody making endless comments. And now that you've asked questions and didn't have any more questions, why don't we see if somebody has a reaction and feedback on what they heard?
There we go. Everyone know where the reactions tab is?
Oh yeah, yes, at the bottom, the reactions. So feel free to provide your emoji reactions or your or just pipe in and give your thoughts.
So Karen, I just have a comment for Antoine. Actually, I added it into the chat as well. So it was regarding the partnership with Mercedes-Benz. So I think that's going to be much more about opening another can of worms. But I thought it's good to highlight, because if we incentivize people with like public transport and all that, just because they bought a green car per se, like, you know, the car is electric or hybrid, I think it kind of defeats the purpose, because that car it's still a car, and car is the enemy of public transport because that causes congestion. So I'm not sure if you have any like further inputs regarding that.
We're very happy with our relationship, and we don't really have any comments on what Mercedes does or does not. It was really for illustrative purposes and to illustrate the flexibility of the solution. But thanks for your input.
All partners are good.
Yeah.
Bern, I want to get to fit you in here. Hello.
Thanks. So Antoine and Helena, I loved your presentation. I love what you're doing. I think that anything that we can do to digitalize and make it easier to get to transit, and I'm also not particularly against cars getting people to transit, as long as they're somehow increasing their use of transit and decreasing their use of cars. So I think that it's important, the kinds of things you're doing, and anything that can have us have that access easier and more fluid. And I also think that we should be extending these kinds of ideas to the use of commercial TSPs, as well as the use of purely the use of transit. But thank you very much for your work. I'm fascinated with it.
Thanks, Bert.
Well, that's wonderful. So we're going to call it the end of the webinar then. Thank you again to everyone who registered and participated. Thank you to FAIRTIQ for sponsoring this opportunity, not only for Ontario Transit Systems, but to bring this global perspective. Much appreciated. And closing comments over to you, Antoine.
Why does the unmute button disappear when you need it?
There we go.
Well, we're really, you know, I left a really great career at Metrolinx. I was having a lot of fun and doing really, I think, important work with great people. But I was really curious about exploring the startup world, and boy, do I not regret it. We know that Europe is not the same as North America, and we've had the feedback, well, this would never work here. But we're very open to hearing from anyone who has ideas of on how to tweak and modify, be it the messaging or the product itself, because we think that you really have to focus on the key elements, which is the ability to track the origin destination points in between and pair that with a really powerful pricing engine, and I think an ethos of really easy to use interfaces, and a commitment as much as possible to not use hardware so that we can be easy in and in the case of a pilot, easy out. So thank you very much for your attention. Elena, do you want to add a couple words?
There's not much to add, but thanks also Karen and Antoine. It was really fun to be here tonight. Yeah, I really hope we can really benefit Europe with the North American perspective. So I think it can really be an amazing global product, and with some modification, it can make public transport definitely more attractive to everyone in the world.
Wonderful way to end. Thank you, everyone. Take care.